All right. Welcome, everybody, to yet another week. We are on week 13 now, which gives us, after this week, we have 3 more weeks of class yet. I mean, despite all the things that are going on, things are moving pretty quick now. So tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to start getting into some of the final stuff that we're supposed to know by the end of this class. And what we're going to do that is we're going to start getting into the CSWA practice files. That's Certified SolidWorks Associate Practice Files, because these can be found towards the end of your book. Today specifically, we're going to be in Chapter 21. Now, here you can see under Week 13, Sessions 24 and 25, which would be this week, we've got 3 assignments due. We have the CSWA Practice Model 21.6 through 21.12. That's what we will be doing in this lecture specifically. We have a CSWA Practice Quiz. These are going to be the 5 questions at the beginning of Chapter 21. These are multiple choice, and the answers are inset into the quiz. You'll go into the quiz, click on the right answer. The answers will not be in the same order as they are in the book, so do keep track of that. Make sure that you're reading the answer itself and not the letter, because they don't have letters in the quiz online. And then finally, what you guys will be handling yourselves is this CSWA wheel right here, which is it starts on page 21-13. That's inside there. So all in all, we've got about 75 points worth of credits for this particular course class week. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and start on our first on our model. So we're going to be going to page 21-6 and opening up SolidWorks. Now obviously we're going to start a new part, so we're going to go New and Part, and I'm going to walk you guys through this pretty much just like we normally walk through this kind of stuff. Okay, so here is our part environment, and we are just going to be following along with the book more or less. In the case of the CSWAs, a couple of the things that we're going to be seeing on here is the couple of things that the CSWA has that has you do that we don't usually do it. So let me get rid of that guy. I don't know why that's up there. Okay. So that includes assigning material, and then looking for the center of gravity. So we're going to be doing those 2 things kind of towards the end. So first up, let's go ahead and start off by starting a sketch on the front plane. So we're going to go ahead and go over to our left-hand side. We're going to be going front plane, starting a new sketch. Now, as I said towards the beginning of the semester, and now that we're kind of getting into it, I'm going to stop picking and prodding and going up to the menus for the tools that I can get to using my quick bar. Remember, the S key is what you click for your quick tools. It's going to bring up your most commonly used tools per work environment right up next to your mouse. I find this way easier than hotkeys, because I'm not always having to remember what hotkey is what. I just know that S brings up my tools, and I know where my tools are. So we're on our sketch. Let's go ahead and first up, let's create we're going to create kind of the background here. So if you look at the image on 21.6, we've got a circle with a couple of cuts on either side, and then we've got a construction line going vertical and a construction line going horizontal. We're going to put in the construction lines first, and then we'll kind of build from there. So first, let's go with the center line. We're going to go straight down with one of them. Okay, and then we're going to create another one. Now, in this case, to create another one, we can either exit the tool and re-enter the tool, or if you hit enter 3 times, I just hit enter 3 times, that accepts your change, exits the tool, and re-enters the tool. So that way it's just a quick little way, especially since our hands are most often like right next to the keyboard. It's a quick way to be able to get back in your tool really fast. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the origin on this one. In my case, I'm going to be really careful, because you can see here that I've got the origin and the midpoint. This one's the midpoint, this one's the origin, and I don't want to click on the midpoint on accident. So I want to make sure that I get that origin, come back out, and click. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and select the origin and hold Control and select my vertical one here. I'm going to make that the midpoint. That will just kind of help define this center line a little bit more than it was already defined. Okay, so now we've got our construction line shape that we're going to be using kind of back behind the circle that we're going to be making. Next up, let's go ahead and put in our circle. So we're going to click on, we're going to grab our circle tool. You can go up to the menu, or you can just hit your S key and go to circle. I'm going to click on the origin because, again, remember, we always want to tie these things down. They must be tied down to the origin, and that especially goes for the first feature that you create. If you don't tie it down to the origin, any other feature is technically floating, so we don't want to do that. Always tie it down to the origin by making our first click on the origin. Okay, so now we've got our circle. We need to go ahead and dimension that. Let's grab our dimension tool, come out, and that's going to be 8 inches. Now, because that was our first dimension laid, it auto-scaled everything else. It's kind of nice to do that that way, especially because I didn't know what size these construction lines were. So if I put my circle in first, then dimension that circle, it's going to make everything scale and not just the circle. Okay, so there we've got our circle. We've got an 8-inch diameter on that circle. And next up, let's go ahead and put in our angled little cutouts here. So we're just going to grab the line tool. We're going to click, and here's the kind of tricky part is for the circles themselves, or for the lines themselves, we don't want to be too strict about where we're putting them. Okay, I got one of them there. I'm going to hit enter 3 times to exit and re-enter the tool. Then I'm just going to put another one here. The reason that we don't want to get too specific is if we go and start snapping them and start clicking on stuff, it's harder to fully define it later because you could put in a relationship that you didn't necessarily mean to put in. So making sure that they're as loose as possible at this case will make that easier later on. Okay, so we've got those in. The next thing we want to do is we want to make these symmetrical. Remember that symmetric is basically mirroring. It's saying that we want this shape to be the same as this shape in the same orientation, etc. So let's go ahead and click on this top one. Now to do a symmetric relationship, we need 2 like features, in this case 2 lines, and then still holding control, we need a center line. That center line is always going to be the feature or the point around which it becomes symmetric. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on our symmetric. And we can see that this one kind of went a little bit shy, but that's okay. Can pull that out a little bit. And there we go. So now we've got our 2. Next up, let's go ahead and we need to do a little bit of trimming. So let's go ahead and grab our trim tool. So here we go, trim entities. We're going to chop this side of the circle off there. We're going to go in here and we're going to cut the overhangs of these 2 lines to make them coincident with the circle right here. Then we're going to trim that outside of that circle like that, creating kind of this this flattened off section over here. Next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and reclose this in. So I'm going to grab my line tool. I'm going to come click up here where the circle is impacting this center line. I'm going to go straight down and select the bottom where that circle is impacting that center line. Okay, so now I've got my fitted shape again, but I've still got these guys over here that are blue. So let's go ahead and define those. So we're going to grab our dimension tool. First, we need to go ahead and click on a line, then the center line because we need an angle. Remember, all lines are going to be dictated by probably about 3 dimensions, generally speaking, or relationships. Horizontal, vertical being taking the place of, in this case, an angular dimension, and then the end point of one point and the end point of another point. Okay, so there, we're going to go ahead and click there, and we're going to say that is 45 degrees. And then if you look down at our book, this is the bottom of page 21-6. You see we've got 2 different dimensions here. They're both 1.75. However, the top one, the one up here, has an REF on it. We covered the reference dimensions, I believe, last course, maybe the lecture before that. But reference dimensions are dimensions that are specifically only there for reference, and they are driven dimensions, meaning that they're not driving dimensions. So you can't change that dimension. That dimension is a byproduct of another dimension. So what we need to do is we need to put the dimension in from our horizontal center line up to this first point here. That's going to be 1.75. Now, as I hit enter on that, watch this one up here. Watch this gap. Okay, actually, let's do this a little bit different so that I can show you guys the difference between a reference dimension and a standard dimension. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to go ahead and put this dimension in right here. Okay, 1.14. However, I'm going to change what this dimension is. If I right-click this dimension, and I come down here, right above mark for drawing, it says driven. So there are two types of dimensions, a driven dimension and a driving dimension. A driving dimension is what we normally put in that actually makes the shape. The second I hit driven, you can see that dimension goes gray, which means that that dimension is no longer driving the part. So watch, as I grab this line, I can move that still because it's not driving. And it's going to change as I move that. And it's not confining me. It's just giving me a reference as to what that edge is. Okay, so now I'm going to hit my dimension tool again, come down here to the horizontal center line, click up here, put in my 1.75. You can see that this one, my reference dimension, went to 1.75 as well. Okay. So now we are fully defined. The book has us putting a vertical relationship in between this point and this point. That's technically over-defining. It's unnecessary because these two lines are already symmetric. But if you do have issues over here with being underdefined, that's probably what it is. So in mine, it worked correctly. It maintained relationships as I trimmed. Sometimes trimming gets rid of relationships. So if you do still have an undefined situation with a blue line, you can go ahead and make that point here and this point here both vertical in relationship, and that should solve that. Okay, let's go ahead and exit our sketch now. Go back into our 3D environment. And the next thing we need to do is create a feature out of this. So we're going to go ahead and do an extrude. I'm going to use my S key. You can go up there to the Features tab. And I'm going to hit the Extrude Boss Base button. Now, we've got a couple of different things we need to do. We need to change the type. So we've got the direction blind right now. But what we want is we want mid-plane because we want this thing going on either side of that center point. And then our overall length is going to be 16 inches. And that's going to give us that shape. So I'm going to go ahead and hit my green check mark. And now we've got an elongated kind of cut off semicircle of a block. So we'll go ahead and end this video there. You can go ahead on to the next one for the remainder, for the next couple of steps anyway. Thanks.